So we're now going to walk through the frequently made mistakes that I found during my reviews of assignment 4A. A couple things to note, as always, please make sure you document your code, whether or not I tell you to or not, make sure you do that. Please make sure to address my comments from earlier assignments. And of course, probably the most important thing is make sure that all the unit and integration tests are passing. Many people did very well on this assignment, which is great. It's really not a very hard assignment, but some people didn't do very well. And the people who didn't do well, often it was very clear that they either didn't run the integration and unit tests, or they ran them and got errors and never came to office hours to get help. So there's really no excuse for not getting help. We have lots of office hours, and we're always there to answer your questions and very responsive on the forum. So if you're not getting things working, then you need to be reaching out more systematically. So let's start with a discussion of some of the problems I saw in the being blocker class. So that actually is a fairly simple class. Here's the block method. You don't need to do anything by checking if done signal dot get count equals 0. That's unnecessary. Also, this code has a syntax error. There's something missing here. And always make sure that you return true from the block method once you've done what you need to do to wrap up that processing. And take a look, if you'd like, at the documentation for the managed blocker interface to learn about the return values. There was a really weird problem here. I'm not even sure what was going on, but don't be calling the notify method. That is not one of the methods that you should be calling on the barrier synchronizers. And you're also using the wrong barrier synchronizer in this case. You should be using the exit barrier by this point, not the entry barrier. And then also don't be returning mEntry.getNumber waiting equals 0. Just return true. It's a lot simpler. Let's take a look at acquire, Palanteri, and gaze. This is actually an example of a problem that's left over from the previous assignments. You need to make sure that you surround the call to Palanteri.gaze and release Palanteri with a try catch block. A try finally block, not a try catch block, a try finally block. And that way, if the gaze method were to throw an exception like the interrupted exception, then we would still release the Palanteri. Also, I'll just note something here. You do not need to call catch. There needs to be no catch here, just a try finally. Let's take a look at another problem with block. This is a little bit out of order, but I think you'll get the point. This code is just too complicated. There's no need to be checking if a wait returns greater than 0 and set releasable to true, etc. Just call await and wait till it's done. That's a very simple use of an entry barrier based on a Java cyclic barrier synchronizer. Okay, just for kicks, let's go ahead and move this code up here so that it's in the right place. Now let's take a look at some problems when we move into the fork join pool manager.java class. So first of all, there's no need to put a try catch block around the call to process all beings. It doesn't throw an exception in this particular case, or it shouldn't be throwing an exception. You should be catching any exceptions it does throw and handle it internally. So don't go ahead and put a try catch block around process all beings. Let's take a look at initialized barriers. There's a number of problems here. So first of all, you need to think very carefully about what parameters you should be passing to cyclic barrier and countdown latch. And I'll give you a little hint. You need to know the number of beings, and the number of beings, of course, are the things you're going to be waiting for in your entry barrier. And since you also have a main thread that's kind of starting everything up and then also waiting for all the other threads to complete, you need to make sure you add one for the main thread as well, the calling thread. So in this particular case, you need to have that count, and that count is something that you get from making a method call that tells you the number of beings. Passing in the gazing iterations makes no sense because that's not the same thing as the beings. I'm not sure what it means to pass in a method reference to initialized barriers. I'm not really even sure if that's going to compile. But at any rate, you shouldn't be doing that. There's no need to do that. And likewise, for the countdown latch, there's no need to call get gazing iterations. That's the wrong thing to pass. So please go back and read the specification more carefully to see what to do. Likewise, down here, don't be calling get thread count, although that will actually turn out to be the right value, but instead be calling the method to get you the number of beings instead. And down here, there's no need to use a stream to stream the result of get beings, which returns a list. You don't need to turn that list into a stream. Instead, you can just use the for each method, which is defined on list. So it'll end up being the same behavior in this case, but there's no need to do the extra conversion to a stream when for each already works perfectly well on a list. Now let's move into process all beings. I think it's probably fair to say that almost everybody who had problems with this assignment had problems with process all beings. And so I'll give you some hints here, but you're really going to have to sit down and figure this out. It's not hard. In fact, it's quite simple, but you need to sort of think about what it is you're trying to do. So a whole bunch of people, again, the people who got things wrong, and there weren't that many, there were probably maybe 8 to 10 of them. People who got things wrong typically didn't actually end up executing the code concurrently. So they would be omitting something very important here. And I'll let you go figure out what that is. So that's part of the assignment, to figure out what you need to do to make sure that your code will execute concurrently in the context of the common fork join pool. And if you go back and listen very carefully to what I just said, you should have no problem figuring out what to do. So that's one thing. Make sure you're actually executing the code concurrently. Then here's a weird problem. It looks like someone just kind of cut and pasted the code from the lecture material. There is no supplier managed blocker. So this code wouldn't even compile. I'm not sure what it was. I think I sort of know what it was trying to do, but don't just cut and paste things blindly from the lecture slides and then have your code not compile and be satisfied with that. That's really not what you're supposed to be getting out of this class. So if you run into problems, come to office hours, ask questions on Piazza. Don't just cut and paste things blindly. That's bad form. So this code won't work because it's just not going to compile. It's got some other problems too. Also, please use the rethrow runnable adapter to avoid the need for putting a try-catch block in this context. There is a need for a try-catch block in this method, but you don't want to do it in this context. Okay, so let's go down a little bit further. If you see here, there's an example of having too many try-catch blocks. You don't need to put a try-catch block around mEntry.await and mExit.await. Instead, use a try-catch block around the body of the entire method, which will then catch the exception and rethrow it properly. And actually, you don't really want to rethrow an exception here. This, I should probably also say something like this method shouldn't, if I could spell, this method shouldn't throw exception. I think that's probably why the code above had that try catch when calling process all beings. You shouldn't be throwing an exception. Instead, you should just be catching the exceptions and printing a stack trace or something like that. So other problem, don't throw runtime exception here. Okay, so you don't need to have those calls, the try catch surrounding each call to the await methods. That just clutters the code unnecessarily. Let's see. Down here, we can see that this code is also incorrect. What you need to do is have a lambda expression that will cause the fork join pool managed block method to run concurrently. So what you need to do here is make sure you put things in the right context so the call to managed block will be executed in the common fork join pool. And this code, of course, is not going to do this. I'm not quite sure what this code is doing, but I know for sure it's not going to work, and it undoubtedly failed the integration test. If for some strange reason this code did not fail the integration test, let me know, but I don't think it should work. And I think it would probably just hang. So this code is incorrect. There's actually a number of variants of this problem. Here's an example where the code is executing the wrong method reference. It's executing acquire Palanteri and gaze, which is absolutely not what it should be doing at all. And then it's going ahead and it's calling fork join pool.manage block, but it's not calling it in the context of a concurrent background thread in the common fork join pool. It's calling it in the calling thread, which is also incorrect. So make sure you think about this carefully. It's really not hard. You just have to put things in the right context. And then here is an interesting and subtle problem. So this person called entry barrier await before trying to spawn or trying to make the managed blocker run in the context of the threads in the fork join pool, the common fork join pool. Well, that's not going to work because the await call will not return until all the other await calls for all the other threads are at their await barrier as well. Because remember, they're all going to start up at the same time. That's the whole point of using a cyclic barrier as an entry barrier. So this code will just block. And in fact, again, if you run the unit and integration tests as I did, the code just hangs. So that should be a pretty good indicator that something's wrong. So that is incorrect. You need to move that below where you go ahead and execute all the various Lambda expressions calling managed block. Likewise, this code is also incorrect. It's not executing the managed block invocation in the context of the common fork join pool. It's calling it in the context of the calling thread, which is not where you want to have it called, because that will get you no concurrency whatsoever, and your program will hang, and you will not pass go. You will not collect $200. You will not gaze in the beings will not gaze into the Palanteri manager, and so on. Okay, so those are the frequently made mistakes that I saw in people's code who submitted everything properly and on time. So if you got these comments back, please go ahead and fix them. Please make sure you document your code more thoroughly, and please make sure that you run the unit tests. Since this is reading week, I will move the next programming assignment, which is assignment 4B, probably to the start of next week or the end of this weekend. So give you a little breathing time. The intent of the reading week is to give you some break from doing assignments, but we'll pick up again either Sunday or Monday with the next assignment. So you'll need to start fixing these things, but of course you don't have to fix everything here until you get to finishing assignment 4B. So that'll give you a little bit more time to get everything done. As you might expect, we're in really good shape to get everything wrapped up by the end of class. You'll have a chance to work on assignment 4B and fix anything in assignment 4A. And everything should be entirely wrapped up by the time we're done with class at the end of the month.